Okay, welcome everybody to another Sunday of When Black Women Gather. This Sunday we have the pleasure of talking to Josie Gonsalves. I'm so excited for you all to hear about the work that she's doing. And Linda, everybody knows the professor, who is also working with Josie. And we're talking about restoring the Black voice. As we know, we don't have the voice that we used to have. Our forums for our voice have been diluted or just changed. Like we used to have the radio, we owned our own radio. And of course we had a lot of information coming from churches and our social justice organizations, and all that's changed. And what we're going to hear about today is a new platform that Josie has put together, which is phenomenal. It's called Public Square, and I kind of, yeah, we're talking about, she's going to restore the unfiltered Black voice so that we can, because what we say now, it's diluted. But Josie has created this platform, and she's always trying to get us to be engaged. And I'm sorry, Josie, I haven't been good at getting involved, but I will definitely, you see some of you, I hope you all went to the website and saw some of the articles that are on there and some of the people who have already written for her. And I think she's going to share with us how we can all contribute in that and support what she's doing, and tell us how she did it. So with that, I'm going to bring, Josie, are you going to turn on your camera?
Actually, Linda's going to go first.
But Josie, you're going to introduce you. I'm going to
bring you both on screen.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You all can take it from there. Okay, so there's Linda. And
all right.
So we go with Josie. So I'm going to silence myself and just leave it up to you all. Thank you both for coming. I really appreciate you coming in and Linda being, what's the name of your car again?
Volvo. Oh, Beauty.
I thought you had a name for it, but okay, yeah. Never mind.
I do. Black Beauty.
She's in Black.
I'm going to tell her what you said.
Okay, I'm silencing myself. Thank you, ladies.
Helen, I have a colleague who's joined.
Okay.
At the late, Andy Richards.
Okay,
I'm here for moral support. I'll chime in occasionally.
Okay, let me know when you want me to bring her on screen. I will.
Well, anytime she's ready to come on screen.
Just let me know, Ms. Richards. When you turn on your camera, I'll bring you on. Thank you so much for coming. So, Josie, tell us a little bit about what you're doing and what was the motive for you to do this, and what have been. It just looks like a great thing. I hope. Again, I'm going to put the link in the chat.
I'll share a screen. I'll share a screen about.
Okay. Cool.
So I'm first, let me say thank you so much, Helen, for inviting me here today, and actually not me, but really the work which is Public Square Amplified, and to begin sort of a beginning conversation about a press and a media and voice and ideas and narrative and storytelling and all of those things that when we talk about press or media, we talk about the way in which people show up, and not just Black people, but the way everyone shows up, in ways in which stories and ideas are shaped and crafted, and the way in which we digest those stories, inculcate those mythologies or stereotypes, and that eventually lead to the way in which we engage with each other and the kind of work we do in social and political transformation. So I thought maybe I would invite, before I sort of give you sort of the spiel about Public Square, I thought I would begin with sort of an overview of press, and Linda and I can sort of talk about that, sort of the history of press and the history of press, particularly in the United States. And of course, I always go back to Thomas Paine and Thomas Jefferson when I think about the history of press in this country. But I thought I would begin with Linda, who actually is one of the original co-founders of Public Square Amplified. And so for several years, I've only been in New Jersey for a short bit, maybe 7 years or something. And Linda and I, in the short time we've known each other, we've often talked about creating a civic institution, an organization sort of teach about civics, bring civics back into the conversation, and sort of these just to create sort of, how would I say, to make it digestible and to make it commonplace, and that it becomes part and parcel of the way in which we think about how we show up in the public space. So Linda and I have been talking about a civic institution for a while, and because I've been writing off and on for years, and I thought that journalism would be a terrific way to sort of begin to bring civics back, and not just in writing about it, but the way in which we engage young people in the conversation. So for us, journalism is a tool of civic engagement, and so it's sort of an outgrowth of many, many conversations and many years of activism. And so I come into this new space as an activist, not as a journalist. I'm not a journalist. I'm not, I think maybe I took a journalism class in high school. So I don't come at this from that perspective. I come at it from an idea and a desire to change the space in which I exist in, to change the world. And that's sort of an activist approach, and to engage people in that larger conversation. And so I thought I'd share now with Linda, and bring Linda in to sort of give a sort of backdrop and background to when we talk about press and media, what do we mean, and how do we get here? Go on, Linda.
Yeah, and that's really important that people understand. I'm operating from my car in case you haven't figured that out, but I think it's a little obvious. Anyway, I think the first thing that I would like to start with is for people to understand that there's a big difference between press and media. All right. And even before we go further about the role of the Constitution and the role of the Black press. So I want to start with the fact that the whole concept of media, I guess the architect of it in some way was Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he took the psychology part from Sigmund Freud and used that for something called groupthink. He was the master of getting people to think together. Everybody walk lockstep. And he pretty much was involved in working in this country from World War I all the way up to the Clinton administration. And if you want, there's actually a documentary on him. But he's really sort of the father of public relations, media, commercials, advertising, and ultimately propaganda. Now, you know, he was involved in getting the American public on board to support World War I. He was involved in getting women to smoke cigarettes. The whole idea is to make women think that since they didn't have the appendage on their body that men have, that the cigarette would serve that purpose. He was also, and the hardest job he ever had was to actually convince women during the 50s to use cake mix. And because of the socialization of women, the whole thing that, you know, you take care of your family, you cook, you do all those things that we know are basically domestic, it was very difficult for him to convince women that they should use cake mix. And I can't really remember what the impetus of it was, but I do know that there were companies that paid him considerable money. Ultimately, the only way he was able to get women to contribute, they had to be, for them to use cake mix, they had to be involved in contributing. So what they decided, the manufacturers of the companies decided, well, what we'll do, we'll let them think they're contributing by having them use milk and an egg. Ultimately, for those who are around them, we know they only needed water, but that was the whole idea to get women involved. So when we think about press and media, we must understand that the media is totally different. Its motivations are different, whereas the press, the United States Constitution, the whole concept of press is to educate people. As a matter of fact, let me just read that part of the Constitution, which is the First Amendment and the Bill of Rights. And it's first because it's so important, unlike the Second Amendment. I just had to throw that in. It's second means second, first means first. So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. No word in there. It's no media. If you look yourself, go to your phones, you will not find the term media in the First Amendment. Or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition government for redress of grievances. What does that mean? That means you can complain and it shouldn't be a problem for you. So that's what the US Constitution says. The First Amendment of the Bill of Rights actually says. So fundamentally, the role of the press and the purpose of it was to educate the American public by notifying the public when the other branches of government were not acting on behalf of the people, right? That's why they call it the fourth estate. Its job was to check on government and to report back to the people. That was its role. Now, I have to say as a side, because most people don't know, is that the US Post Office played a critical role. And if you don't know, the Post Office existed before this country. And it was the role of the Post Office to make sure that the information that the press had acquired would actually get to the people. So, you know, I know today people don't think about the post office as important as it is, but it is fundamental to the Constitution. And most people know, well, you may not know, but there's a real attack going on against the United States Post Office. And if you think about it, if there's no post office, that really is a hit to the Constitution of the United States. It's really a hit to our, quote, democracy. So it's important. So fundamentally, the role of the press was to educate the public, and how they were able to function was actually by notifying the public and using the post office to get that information out. The formats that the, at least at that time, initially, up until recently, and including now, first of all, was the print media. You talk about Thomas Paine, Josie talked about Thomas Paine, and if you haven't read Common Sense, please read Common Sense, if for no other reason to let you know that the actual reading comprehension or the literacy rate at the time of Thomas Paine was higher than it is today in 2022. It was higher during the time of Thomas Paine than it is today in 2022. So that's really important. So what were the formats? You know, print, right? Everybody knows print. You can go back 7,500 years with the Egyptians, print. Radio was someone, I think Josie talked about, television, the internet, and then later and now, you know, social media. So that's pretty much the ways that people have been communicating. But now the role of the Black press, well, it's not new. It's fundamentally been around in different ways for a very long time. There's a publication, Helen, if you can put this in, called News for All the People by Juan Gonzalez. And it gives the history amongst people of color, primarily indigenous people and Black people in this country, and how people were writing things to justify how they were treated. For example, with the indigenous people, you would write stories, or the majority population, I don't know if they're majority at the time, but the ones in charge, basically they would write stories to justify killing the indigenous people and to, you know, subject us to all the things that they subjected us to over that particular time. And so people were writing stories, and actually the first newspaper, if I remember, was actually put together in defense of what was going on by indigenous people in this country. So the role of the Black press, is to inform, to educate, and empower. Well, that's a little different than what it is in terms of the First Amendment. For us, we have additional needs, different requirements because of our history here in this country. So it was to inform, to educate, to empower us against the interests of those who were oppressing us. And it was also to notify our community, initially from a race point of view, but now across all issues. So it's not like as though it's different from the other press. What it is, as Josie's going to talk about, it's about telling our story, controlling our narrative, as opposed to having other people do that. And that's critical. That is really critical to how we make decisions about our day-to-day. So traditionally, the Black press was done and provided in a Black way, right? It's a Black style, Black flavor. That's how we did it. It informed our behavior for our family, community priorities, cultural norms and values. They knew, even then, all the way back, they knew that whoever controlled the narrative controls our cultural mindset, our thought process, our language. And it may not seem like that's a big deal, but even using the same language, and I remember growing up, we're using the English language our way, And you can actually be talking to another Black person in front of white people using their language, and they didn't know what we were talking about. We're losing that. But that's something that would be perpetuated through the Black press, our economy, and ultimately our entire culture. So what were the methods of communication that we were involved in since the beginning of this country that were critical and became threats to the powers that be? First, drums, right? You had people from different areas of the continent of Africa. They didn't all necessarily have the same exact culture or they use the same exact language, but they knew how to communicate with drums. And then what happened? People got hip to that and said, oh no, we can't be playing any drums. We're not having that. Then the spirituals. I mean, we just recently heard Ramsey Lewis pass away and his way to order, right? He was communicating in that song. Those spirituals were a way to send messages. Those songs, many of them, if you go back and look at the history of spirituals, that had to do with the conditions of chattel slavery and us getting out of it. It wasn't that we were talking to God. We already knew God was with us, but we had to use our abilities to navigate and negotiate our circumstances. So spirituals were a way. That was our press. Now, they had one kind of press. We had our flavor of press. You had quilts, right? People did quilts as a way to give people information of how to get out of their circumstances, how to get to Canada, how to get to the North, how to get to Mexico, how to go to South America and get out of the condition of chattel slavery. You also had the Pullman Porters. It wasn't their job, but it was a method of communications. They used to drop off the Chicago Defender in small communities in the South where the trains went. It wasn't their job, but see, they thought from a communal social point of view. I know we think about communal, we think communist and socialism. No, we come from a history and a culture of communal and societal. And so these Pullman Porters, right? They could have lost their jobs, but it was more important that they get news out. So they became a method of communicating. So they became the press in their own way. The church served, the sermons that the pastors gave. There were ways to communicate again, because you couldn't let the masters know what you were talking about. So pastors had to know how to communicate. That was a form of press. See, our press is a little bit different from other people because we have so much flavor. I don't know how else to say it. We just some cool people, and we always figure out a way. What is it? Make a way out of no way. The other thing, Black teachers in the segregated South, what they did, which is amazing, when we couldn't be second-class citizens, they educated their students about civics when they couldn't even be second-class citizens. And that information coming to these students led to us having the first Black this elected official, first Black that, because these are the people who came through the Great Migration. And when they came with the understanding that information that those Black teachers had instilled in them, they came with that, and they knew how to organize because they had been informed and educated by those Black teachers. The other way we do it, stories and wisdom from the community, from our community elders. That's a system of press. Your community elders, the stories that they tell when the children used to be around them when we had community, that was a way to convey and educate our community. Family histories, people passing down information about family histories is a way to communicate. But the one I want to spend a little bit more time on, and I'm going to bring it so, Josie can move on, is, well, before I get to that one, that's the exciting one. Well, they're all exciting, but this one I want to talk about a little bit more. But I would lead, and Josie spoke about this a little bit, Black radio. We control this. You have to keep in mind. And I remember it's late 1971 when nobody wanted Black folks' money. And we have to keep that in mind. Nobody wanted our money, right? So there was a lot of industries that were self-sufficient. We didn't need anybody. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with it. Black radio and the Black music industry, right? Those were two things that were essential to our culture, and they were essential to getting information out. So Black radio was really very effective in terms of the bus boycott and the whole story. And even more recently with wasn't Michael Brown, what was it, Josie, the gentleman who got hung? Well, they had this was, oh God, I can't think of the guy who was syndicated on the radio. He's no longer on it. He used to be on BLS. And he was the one to let everybody know about the nooses that were hanging on the tree at the school. This must have been, wow.
I can't,
Yeah, if anybody remembers. But
Michael
Baisden,
yes, Michael Baisden, right.
Michael Baisden on the radio was syndicated. And what he did, press, right? People came from all over the country because he was talking to people all over the country about what was going on. And they all went to that point. And you notice Michael Baisden, you've not heard from him anymore. I don't know if he's in a local area or what, but he's no longer syndicated because he used the power of radio to communicate and inform. The last part that I'm gonna talk a little bit more about, but I'm gonna bring it to a close, is music. Our music is Black superpower, and people know that. And I can tell you that in the 1940s or 50s, when they got hip to the fact that our music was like our superpower, Harvard University did a report. I don't have the report with me, but if you have a chance, locate the report. It was Black music, Harvard University understanding the significance of Black music. Remember, a lot of people could not read. And so what would happen is the music was a way to convey to the masses what the intellectuals were writing in their books and articles, because many people could not read. So that was really important. So, you know, if nothing else, remember that our music was our superpower, right? And also remember that Black people in this country were revered because of all our challenges. Because of all our challenges here, people around the world basically waited for us because they knew we were going to take the lead when it comes to making things right. So when we talk about music, we have to go back and think about the spirituals, because that was a way to get out of chattel slavery, figure out, you know, how we can get out of this. The blues. I just listened to Bob Law yesterday, and I think I sent it to a lot of people. They talked about the weaponization of music. We don't even talk about the blues anymore. There's no music about the blues, right? Think about it. Billie Holiday. You know, I think about Sam Cooke, Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, James Brown. James Brown, I'm Black and I'm proud. Nobody ever heard that before. That's the press. I'm Black and I'm proud, or don't be a dropout, right? Or Aretha and Otis Redding, respect. Their songs were telling us, they were contributing to the norms and our values, right? Ashford and Simpson, the Whispers, Delphonics talked about relationships. It was constant, you know, now they have magazines and articles. We have people singing, telling us how to navigate relationships if you have some challenges, or how to, you know, how a man is supposed to love a woman, or how a woman is supposed to act. All of those things, those norms, those values they were in our music. And then my favorite song is Willie Hutch, Brother's Gonna Work It Out, because I feel we can always work it out. So I have a couple of years ago, more than a couple of years now, you know, COVID is like almost 3 years, but several years ago when the movie Selma came out, I was asked to facilitate a panel, and I think it was at the PAC, and they had actually invited all these children from the Newark Public School, and they asked them to come in. So I thought about, and I said, what would be the most effective way to communicate with young people? And I thought about music. So I put together resources and music that will provide young people with the flavor of the time. I thought that was a way to inform young people with the music. So I'm just going to go through the categories. If anyone wants to get this, I'll email it to you. But I talked about the 1950s and the 1960s in terms of rock and roll, right? And think about the songs: Jackie Wilson, Etta James, Ruth Brown, Johnny Guitar Watson, Little Anthony and the Imperials. A lot of people don't know that Little Anthony and the Imperials started it. This whole music industry is based on what they did. They appealed for the first time to teenagers. Nobody else had done it. It was the beginning of promotion. It's before Dick Clark. And so if you go back and look at the doo-wop music in the Black community, all of this stuff that's happening in the music industry really sprang from these children who were 13, 14, and 15-year-olds who were writing this music themselves. I have songs of history and dignity. Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit, Nina Simone, To Be Young, Gifted, and Black, Aretha Franklin, Lift Every Voice and Sing, Curtis Mayfield, People Get Ready, and Fifth Dimension, Stone Soul Picnic. Songs to encourage folks to get an education. I talked about James Brown, Don't Be a Dropout. artists and songs that are smooth and light and airy, like Johnny Mathis, you know, if you need to just cool out. Let's see, songs about respect. I talk about Aretha and Otis Redding and respect. James Brown, I don't want nobody to give me nothing. Open up the door, I get it myself. Songs teaching respect, to respect your elders. You know, James Brown again, James Brown again, James Brown again. Bill Rivers and Grandma's Hands, right? Grandma's Hands. Music by genius or for fun. We had that kind of music. Shimmy Cocoa Pop, some of you may remember. Fingertips by Stevie Wonder, Dancing in the Street. As a matter of fact, Dancing in the Street, they blame that song on the rebellions in Detroit and Newark, right? The Pointer Sisters, Jump. Integrated music, Joe Bataan, right? Who was a Black Puerto Rican. He's still around. The Staple Singers, Touch a Hand, Make a Friend. Curtis Mayfield, It's All Right. And Aretha Franklin, I Say a Little Prayer for You. And then you had songs with lyrics representing a change in times. Sam Cooke, Change is Going to Come. Richie Haven, Freedom. Temptations, Ball of Confusion. Temptations again, Psychedelic Shack. OJ's, Message in Our Music, right? That's our press. And then you have movies that, you have songs that went along with movie themes and other songs. Isaac Hayes, Curtis Mayfield, Willie Hutch again. And then songs with lyrics about the spirit of family, community, and the challenges of the economy and other life changes or challenges. You have Pigmeat Markin, Here Comes the Judge. The 5 Stair Steps, It's a World of Fantasy. Gladys Knight with Claudine, right? Which is about the welfare and how, you know, you can get around it. I mean, these songs were giving us the education that the press is supposed to provide, but we did it our way. When you need to cool out, the Drifters, Up on the Roof or Under the Boardwalk by the Drifters. The Supremes and Temptations, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, No Valley Low Enough. Sly and the Family Stone, It's a Family Affair, and so on and so on. So, you know what I'm saying, when we talk about the music, that is another form of press for us, particularly for us. And then I'll just leave you guys with a couple of things to think about before Josie takes over. And I have incorporated media literacy in all my classes, no matter what I taught, whether it's American government, prison subcultures, corrections, it didn't matter. The English courses, whatever I taught, I thought it was important to teach it within the context of media literacy because it has such an impact. I mean, it had a lot of impact when I started. It has more now. So the first thing, which is what I started with you guys, I talked about the difference between media and press. Media designed to advertise and sell to consumers. The press is designed to educate the citizenry, to ensure an informed electorate. They have to identify who the guest is. And, you know, when you watch television in particular, even on the radio, they kind of tell you who the person represents. But who the person represents, and this is for all of us, pay close attention to who the person represents. Who is the organization or their employer? Because if they're getting paid by somebody, believe me, whatever they have to say is going to be within the confines of whoever is funding them. I asked the students to look up the mission of the organization, and that's a research project that they have to do. So they need to understand what's the reason for the existence of this organization. And then, as important is, where is this organization getting their money from? And I'm going to use MSNBC, for example. MSNBC is owned by Comcast, and the last time I looked, they were owned by can't think of the company, but it's a war profiteer. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. And so, you know, you have to look at who their advertisers are. If you remember, they had advertisers. Viagra was a big one. I don't watch MSNBC, but I know when the last time I paid close attention, Viagra was a major sponsor of theirs. Now, they weren't going to tell you Viagra caused a heart attack because that's how Rachel Maddow makes her money. She needs those advertisers at the time, I don't know what she's making now. She's making $12 million a year. And Viagra was contributing sizably to what her salary was. So, you know, I think that that's very important to have other things for my students. But at the end, I always ask my students, and this is something that you can ask yourself, based on the information you get from whatever your source of media or press may be, ask yourself, and my students have to answer this question too. I said, based on the information you have, what impact, if any, does it have on you as a consumer, a taxpayer, and a citizen? We really need to think from that vantage point. We need to know who's talking. We need to know who they represent. We need to know their funding source, because all of that has an impact on the information that we're giving. And remember, that information that we're getting is determining how we're going to live our lives, all aspects of our lives. And so that's it for me for now. Josie.
Wow, you're gonna let Josie talk?
I thought about it.
So thank you, Carter. I thought before I sort of, and by the way, it's Comcast, right? So
no, the defense contractor, I couldn't think of the name of.
I think the defense contractor is, oh yes, I can't remember, but Comcast owns NBC, and then the defense contractor owns Comcast. So I don't know, Andrew Richards, do you want to say anything based on what Carter shared with us around media and press? Do you want to step in?
You know, Linda, I'm in awe. I sent
Andy,
a note
Andy
to
meet Linda,
Josie.
Linda meet Andy.
Andy, how are you?
While you were talking, but you know, I was taught. I am a journalist, and I was taught that the press are the watchdogs for the public. We're supposed to be watching out for everyone and letting you know if there's corruption or if there's going to be a blackout or a hurricane. So you know, idealistically, that's what we're supposed to do.
Mm-hmm.
But Linda's right. But now media's been taken over by corporations, and you have, you know, one company owning several media outlets. I work for NJ.com, which is an advanced media, which is owned by the Newhouse family. And you know, if you look at the various press organizations around the company, it's Tribune, Gannett, Newhouse, there are a few others. And you have to, even though journalists like to think we have all of this freedom, there are constraints put on us with regard to the corporations that we work for. So I just wanted to add that, and then I'll pop in again.
So let me say that both Andy and Linda are members of the advisory committee of Public Square Amplified. Andy is also often a guest editor, and Linda is often a guest writer for Public Square Amplified. So I want to publicly thank both of them for always showing up and supporting Public Square. So let me sort of get to a little bit about Public Square and give you a sense of it. In fact, I sort of, you know, while Linda was speaking, it reminded me of something that I put in a grant last year. One second. And I want to sort of share some of that information with you. So in 1827, free Black men founded Freedom's Journal. And there were Sam Cornish and John Rossworm. And this is what they said when they launched that journal. The peculiarities of this journal render it important that we should advertise to the world the motives by which we are actuated and the objects which we contemplate. We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. Too long has the public been deceived by misrepresentations in things which concern us dearly. So that was in 1827 by the two Black men who sort of launched the first sort of Black press. And so so I like to say, and I'd like to think that Public Square Amplified comes out of that long trajectory of the Black press in the US. I'm an immigrant, and in the Caribbean where I'm from, the press has often been a tool of government oppression and suppression. And it has always been the presses, the different sort of newspapers. I grew up in a time of newspapers, not in a time of electronic media. And so newspapers were weapons during elections. And so we understood politics through the different papers, because every political party in the Caribbean, as it is in on the continent of Africa and African countries, and even in Latin American and Central American countries, political parties have their own newspapers. And that's used to share their campaign. It's also used to engage their voters, and also used to sort of lambaste and go after their opponents. So for me, being here in the US and seeing and understanding sort of what we see as a sort of a construct coming out of your constitution that allows the flourishing of the press, and allows citizens to step into the public space and have a conversation on multiple levels across sectors. Public Square Amplified, the name is that in the Caribbean, we often talk about going to the public square to plead your case. And in many of our colonial colonized masters, as we call them, right? You could go to the square and stand in a box and plead your case. And the case was always political, and it was always about revolution, and it was always about transformation. So Public Square Amplified is the name, symbolizes a space that the citizen can claim in the public space to argue their case. So let me just say we're barely a year old. So last fall, we decided to get really serious after conversations and after I personally sort of endured massive racism by actually two media organizations. One I led, the other one I raised monies for. After that happened, I thought, well, I think I should start my own. Writing was important. Writing on the kinds of things I wanted to write about in the way in which I wanted to write about them. I couldn't find a space that would accept my ideas. I'm trying to read the chat at the same time. So I thought, okay, great. We could launch this news organization, and we could do what Linda and I have always talked about, which is how do we engage people in civics? How do we teach them about history and teach them about the way in which they can sort of leverage their individual, whether it's vote or their individual ideas, how can leverage it to make change? And it's always tough, right? In a quote unquote sort of representative democracy to make change. But the press, the media, spaces where your voice can be heard lends us the opportunity to do that. So Public Square was launched. We were incorporated last year on November 11th, 2021. And I want to share sort of a mission while I talk about, share our website while I talk about our mission. Can you guys, am I sharing, Helen?
No, not yet.
Not yet, but I can share, correct?
Okay, we see you. We got you.
Okay, great. So this is Public Square Amplified. I want to tell you a little bit about the thinking around this. So a group of us early of last year, sort of in the spring, got together and started thinking about, well, what does a newsroom look like and what can we possibly do? And how can we build alliances and create a space for ourselves in the news ecosystem in New Jersey, because we're all in New Jersey. And then how can we sort of create a space that will allow us to connect to our home countries, but also on an international level. So how could we do that? And so we created Public Square Amplified and created it as an organization that would be embedded in grassroots activist organizations and it would invite community residents to write stories about what was happening in their community from their perspective. Very often, not very often, but the news space, I think Andy would attest to this, the news space can be what I call a space of perpetuating white supremacy. It's designed on ideas of meritocracy and on certification. And very often ideas on meritocracy and certification, and who gets to decide what press looks like, who gets to decide what editing looks like, what writing looks like. Those ideas come out of sort of a white construct about storytelling and narrative formation. The press has been, the press is a powerful institution. It's been a very powerful institution, as Linda sort of talked about, right? It's changed, it's caused massive changes in legislatures, in laws, in policies. It has been used to perpetuate mythologies and narratives about who white people are and who Black people are, what Blackness is, to reinforce a binary society where you have the oppressed and oppressors, and to engage in this space. And the media has a lot to do with perpetuating those ideas. And I encourage everyone, I dropped it in the chat, that everyone should read Ed Bernay's Propaganda, which Linda referenced earlier. And also to read, when you're reading that, also read Thomas Jefferson's overview of what the role of the press in a democracy, and the role of the press in a free society. Of course, in a representative democracy, as Thomas Jefferson and others had designed. So Public Square Amplified is a grassroots local news organization in New Jersey. And the women who've engaged to build this institution come out of academia, public policy, community organizing, journalism, and a variety of other sectors. Linda was one of the early ones at the table. And for us, using journalism as a tool of civic engagement to address democracy. And I'll have a chance to show you some of the latest articles we've done on democracy. And I'm so happy that Andy's here because it allows me to show some of the work, the collaborative work that we're able to do. So we're building this platform to do a couple of things. We want to train community journalists, train community residents, expand a space and create a space where folks who are coming to us to write are not trained journalists, but they're very embedded in their community, and they're curious about the world, and they're looking to learn to write, and they're looking to tell a story through their eyes. So as I often say to Linda that I'm a Black immigrant woman creating a platform through a lens of anti-racism, anti-capitalism. I'm not doing Black news, I'm doing news. I'm not serving just a Black community or communities of color. I'm serving everyone. I'm serving everyone to challenge the ideas around Blackness, and to challenge the ideas around oppression, and to challenge capitalism, and to challenge racism. So we're writing by the mere visibility of our writers, who are Ecuadorian and from Zimbabwe and from Guyana, and I'm from St. Vincent. And from the South, by them just showing up in the space is sort of breaking paradigms. We are particularly interested in using words that demythologizes Blackness, words and ideas and sentences and phrases and images. We pay particular attention to absolutely every detail that will not perpetuate a particular narrative. I'll give you an example. There was a young student who was an MLK scholar who went off to cover the NAACP conference that just occurred a few months ago, and she submitted her work. And she had a quote from a young person from Newark that talked about Newark being a city of hustlers. That quote was taken out of her story. We're not particularly, and I'm hard on folks I'm hard on Black people. I'm hard on Latinos. I'm hard on people and demand that we show up claiming our power in the space. I demand that we not allow our voices to perpetuate ideas that demean us. And I am pretty hard on making sure that we are sharing stories and ideas and giving voice that allows us to begin to think critically about who we are and how we show up. So we're creating this platform to, listen, it's hard to get folks to show up because we're an all volunteer organization, but people are showing up to write stories. Eventually, we'll have enough money to pay our community journalists, but people are showing up wanting to write their stories and wanted to sort of write differently through an anti-racist, anti-capitalist lens about a variety of issues. I want to show you, because I want to leave time for you to pose questions to me.
Yeah, Josie, I was just going to say, Judy asked if that sentence perhaps could have been reworded, rephrased, and
which one?
The hustler sentence. And I just wanted to say that the demand is, and I think they don't know this piece, I happened to read this piece, is that it was not much thought was given to it. It was just kind of thrown on the page, and like Josie said, she expects nothing but excellence and presence. Even if you don't have all the skills yet, if you're present and you're open, that's more than half of the work done there. So this particular person was not coming to her work with that going on. So to answer your question, perhaps, but I think in this case, I don't even think we ran the story.
No, we pulled a story. So if you, and of course, as you know, Andy's one of our guest editors, and I'm sort of going through this so we leave time for discussion, but I'm invited to speak to journalism classes and other classrooms and in other spaces to talk about Public Square because people are interested in writing for Public Square. And I say to them, it's pretty hard, it's tough, it's rigorous. And we don't guarantee that after all of your work that your story will publish. Because you have to meet us halfway, you have to do the work. You have to be willing to learn new ways of writing critically, thinking critically, paying attention to detail, and being open to changing. We have this one writer that Andy's worked with many times from Ecuador, who endures the ongoing editing of her work. And she comes back time and time again, and she's driven to learn and to grow and to tell the stories in a way in which our value proposition is at the center. And so for us, right, our value proposition is placing race, justice, and community at the center. And so the very idea that these journalists show up, they're placing community at the center. The very idea that they're showing up in spaces and saying, I'm a journalist, and they're non-white, they're changing ideas about who they are in that space. And so for us, if we're going to publish a story by a young person, we want that young person's story to be respected. We want them to be respected. We want to make sure that it is one of the best possible stories we can produce. But at the center of that is our value proposition. And at the center of that is our commitment to changing the narratives about who we are in spaces. So I am seeing that the chat has lots of queries, and I can't see them because
what I hear you saying, Josie, is that you are encouraging that you're creating a space where we take control of how we show up, that we are in charge of it, and if it means pushing people to a place, towards excellence, it's a beautiful thing. So I don't know if you're apologizing for that, but I hope not.
No, I'm not. I'm saying that I'm unapologetically hard and tough in this space because we are presenting our images, we're presenting our ideas, we are leaving ourselves open to being critiqued. We're leaving ourselves open to be challenged in competitions of excellence. And we want our young writers to be the absolute best. And we want them to walk into spaces and to be competitive, like spaces that Andy works in. I mean, Andy works for the largest news organization in New Jersey. And so Andy's one of our editors. And so she's rigorous with our young writers. I mean, we're rigorous with Linda too. Linda's one of our writers. And so I want to sort of get to a couple of stories and show the one that Linda wrote. We did a series for Democracy Day on September 15th, where all news organizations across the world published articles that looked at the threats to democracy. And for us at Public Square, because of course we have lots of young writers and everyone's a volunteer, for us at Public Square, I decided I would sort of curate a few articles around democracy that were quite precise but worked well together. One was from Lawrence Ham, who is the chair of People's Organization for Progress, and I can answer questions about People's Organization for Progress if no one knows about them. But Lawrence Ham, who ran for Senate against Cory Booker a couple of years ago, wrote a piece called In Defense of the Right to Protest. For us, right, so we all understand protest in different ways. The right to protest is supported by, I think, what Linda talked about earlier, and Linda can step back in, right? Our First Amendment right allows us the right to assemble, the right to protest. And it is in protest that, that organizations have changed policies and laws and broken barriers. I mean, the Black press relied on protests and reported on protests that led to changes in the civil rights movement. So protest has always been the way in which ordinary citizens have entered into the public arena. And so for us, we thought it was important that people recognize that the threat to democracy is balanced by the right to protest. So Larry wrote.
I was going to add, Josie, that under the First Amendment of the Constitution, you have the right to assemble.
Yes, assemble.
Right, to come together. And whether that is people protesting, whether or not that's labor unions, even the right to assemble, whether it has to do with you standing with a group of your friends on the porch in front of your house, you have a right to be there. And
yes,
that's important.
I mean, as to just follow up on Linda's piece, I'm sure that many of you have seen the reports, in a variety of news organizations. I mean, in New York, you've got to sign a form to be able to assemble beyond a certain number of people. It happens here in Newark as well. You have to file a request to the city to allow a protest to happen on the street, or for people to assemble over a certain number of people. In New York, it's 25. I can't remember what it is in New Jersey. So Larry Ham wrote this piece called In Defense of the Right to Protest. The next piece was something called The Constitution, a Tool of Liberation. So I approached Linda and Gloria Brown-Marshall, and I said, so let's talk about the Constitution as a tool of liberation. Because we know that when we talk about threats to democracy, we have the Constitution is what we hold ourselves accountable to. And when I say ourselves, I mean the citizens and also our elected representatives. We hold them accountable to ensure the protections of ourselves under a democracy and to protect democracy itself. And so Linda and Gloria Brown-Marshall engaged in a Q&A on the Constitution as a tool of liberation. Then, as I said, Public Square Amplified is pretty embedded in the activist community and in organizing. And we've been covering protest rallies across New Jersey for the past year. And so I did this piece called This Is What Democracy Looks Like. And we collected some key photographs at some key periods and protest rallies across New Jersey over the year. And so that was another piece around the Democracy Day initiative. Then the last piece, I invited the Dean of Africana Studies at Seton Hall to look at ways in which we should think about the historical view of the vote for people who have slavery and mass incarceration and surveillance. What does democracy mean? And so he wrote a piece that looks at that. And this is, of course, one of our protest rallies. Andy Richards, who's on the call, who is our advisory committee member, is actually a guest editor on this series for US Day of Democracy on September 15th. I think I've got to move. I'm trying to move this thing. Oh, great. Recently, I want to just give you a little bit about something that we're working on. We are part of a collaborative, the only local community news organization as part of a collaborative around something called solutions journalism, to look at climate change and the impact of storms on systems and communities in New Jersey. We decided we would look at the ways in which community activists were changing public policy through their activism to address the impact of storm management on low wealth communities. So it is something that we actually these are 2 articles we just published this week. And we're actually about to publish a 3rd piece, probably sometime tonight, that looks at Seton Hall as a perpetrator of what I call environmental crimes against the low wealth communities in the Vailsburg area. We're breaking that story. We've been covering it for the past year, and one of our lead writers will cover it. So I want to, let me just stop there. So local news in...
Josie, can you just show them a little bit of the photo essay, The Black Cowboys?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Andy. That's a really great one. Oh my gosh, yes, thank you. Actually, this is one of our most exciting pieces, right? And, you know, it's just so terrible of me not to show this, because I believe most of you know Brian Branch Price. So Brian Branch Price is a photojournalist, and he's now doing Black portraiture. Brian Branch Price, who lives in Plainfield, New Jersey, we published a photo essay on his love affair with Black cowboys across the country. And so these are pictures of Black cowboys in New Jersey. So if you go to our website, you could check it out. They're absolutely exquisite and breathtaking photographs. He will now feature these photographs and introduce the exhibit with the front page of the Public Square article during Open Doors in Newark. So I don't know how many, I think Helen and Linda, I think you both know him well. I think he covered When Black Women Gather, when you went off to do your...
Well, we went to the
right. And we've been talking actually about, you know, those photographs as one of our photo essays. I'm hoping he will agree to it. We're actually doing a piece on Black farmers. So Brian and I are working on that next piece together.
That's a good.
So tell me.
Black farmers, but
I can't hear anything. Did somebody say something?
It sounds like someone needs to mute.
Oh.
There was a question though. Ms. Atkins, do you still have a question for Josie? Ms. Atkins?
Yes, I do. I may have missed something,
Sure.
but if I didn't, my question is, when the young journalists or aspiring journalists
Sure.
went to the NAACP
Yeah.
convention, demonstrated a lack of knowledge, I'm going to call it, or sophistication, or was he or she given an opportunity to be mentored and to be taught how to write as a journalist?
Absolutely. So,
okay.
So Public Square is a platform to train, as I said earlier, to train young journalists to train them to be writers, to train them to be curious, and to train them to report. So absolutely, it is rigorous. And when I say it's rigorous, Andy Richards, who's one of our leading editors, it is a rigorous process. And so we frame our stories, we work with the journalists one-on-one. So as an example, that journalist probably got 10 hours of editing and mentoring and training on that one particular article. That very same journalist went to DC to cover the Poor People's Campaign. And that journalist also did other stories. So absolutely, we're not going to, and also remember, we're not a news organization that does quick turnaround on news. This breaking news story is rare for us. So we spend a lot of time making sure that the journalist is well supported, or the community report, I should say, is well supported, is prepared. It goes through a learning process. We prepare questions. That journalist had 2 mentors at the NAACP conference. So absolutely, we're pretty rigorous and pretty supportive, and we do a lot of mentoring. There was this one young man who did a book review. I personally spent probably 5 hours with him going through his book review piece line by line, each line, and getting him to understand each line, and then spending time with him about the larger framework of what he was doing. And then, of course, because our value proposition is placing community justice and race at the center, ensuring that he understood ways in which our writing can often empower us or disempower us from a reader's perspective. So we spend a lot of time doing that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so that's absolutely not. When I say it's tough, it's pretty tough. I mean, I've had my editorials ripped apart by the editor as well. I'm the founder and publisher, but I demand that the editors be tough. Andy will tell you. I say to Andy, I want you to be really hard and really tough. We want to produce the best possible stories. And time is not, of course, we have to be cognizant of time because stories can be time sensitive. But we want journalists to be trained, and we want them to, because and community reporters, we're not creating journalists. We're creating opportunities for young writers and residents. And we've even had community reporters, in their 30s and 40s showing up. We want them to claim their voice. We covered it's probably it'll probably be a year this winter. We covered a story of a young man who was arrested by undercover police, he and his 3 brothers, in front of their home in Newark, New Jersey. I think there were probably 30 stories or more written about the arrest, the altercation and the arrest. They were all loaded with questionable facts and references. And we spent time with the family. We met them at their home. We met with the attorney. We spent time with the brothers who were not in jail. And we covered, and we continue to cover that story over the year. We were there at the protest rally when the young man who was in jail spoke for the first time in over a year. Activists had not heard his voice. Many had not heard his voice. And we were there when he spoke to the activists on the street saying that he was thankful. So we are there in the courthouse. I accompany young reporters into the courthouse, helping them to pose questions and to prepare their story to be edited. So we're pretty hands-on. I'm pretty hands-on. I show up with young journalists all the time. I take the photographs, or the photographs that you see on our website. I'm lying on the street taking pictures and climbing up on buildings to take pictures because we want to have the best pictures possible that will show the community in the best possible way. There's I'll show you this one of the photographs I'm pretty proud of. I'll show you this particular this particular piece. Where is it? This story. So this is one of the first stories we did on the Rodwell Spivey brothers. This story I'm telling you about, where the brother spent a year in jail. To get this photograph with his mom, his stepfather, and their attorney, I had to climb up onto the porch, and they were incredibly gracious. So for us, right, as a local news organization, we actually spend time in the community, and Andy Richards is a reporter in the very same tradition of spending time in the community before reporting on a story. So, so if something happens, somebody will text me or I will text them. But they allowed me to come into their personal space and climb up on their porch to take that story, because I wanted readers to look into the eyes of the mom and the dad. I wanted them to look dead center into the picture. This is another picture I took where I wanted the brothers, and this is the daughter. This one is the daughter of the brother who was jailed. I wanted people to see the sky and to see them in sort of a, in grandeur. I wanted us to sort of see them just flying. This is another photograph. That's them and friends. But this is also, where is it? I think this one. I wanted to show the camaraderie of young men that we don't often think about with sweetness and with kindness and with love. And so these are guys who live in the South Ward, and on one of the toughest blocks in the South Ward, and we see them as hard, and we distance ourselves from them. And I wanted to show the kind of love that exists in these young men and the kind of love that exists in our community. And so this is a second photograph that I'm incredibly proud of. But you don't get to take these photographs and tell the stories the way we tell it unless you spend time in the community and spend time with families and individuals and hearing them. There's a Black woman who is a chair of the Commission of the Equal Protection, the Commission on Environment for New Jersey. She said to me, Josie, I really appreciate Public Square because other outlets make me look insipid. I've been doing this organizing work and environmental justice work and for a very long time, and no one ever gives me my full quote. So for us, it's important to have the community show up center and in their fullness. So I'm going to take a break if anyone wants to pose questions about Public Square. And then I want to tell you about local news a little, and then talk about what we did this year, and then what we see for the coming year. Any questions?
I just want to say that I've really enjoyed you sharing your vision. I don't know, even though we've talked about it, I think this is the first time that I'm fully understanding what you're doing. And I see a Amy Goodman Democracy Now! In your future.
Check you out. Yeah.
No, I don't see Amy Goodman, but I see the quality work of what you're trying to do to attain that level of perfection. So kudos to you.
One of the things I often talk about when I tell this story is that, I'm a Black radical Marxist, and I got to this point with not just Black women showing up, but also a few white progressive women who are neoliberal women who decided, well, we're gonna see if this, we're gonna go with you wherever you want to go. One of them happens to be our managing editor right now, and the other one happens to be the CEO of our fiscal sponsor, and the other one has sort of been extremely supportive in getting us into places, though we are so new, getting us places to get possibly funded. We launched this without any money. We have operated without paying anyone. And, I met the publisher of Mother Jones, and he's like, I just don't understand how you get people to show up. And Andy is sitting there going, yeah, I just don't understand how I got into this. And Linda's the same. She's like, I just don't understand. How did she, I'm not supposed to be doing this. I'm too busy. So, and Annie's like, I have a real job here, and I have a mom I have to take care of. And so people show up. And because it's it's an interesting concept, there are very few. In fact, I don't think there's another local news space like Public Square. So we've been doing this volunteer, and next year, we want to pay our journalists. We're part of a Solutions Journalism Collaborative, and they gave us our first sub-grant. And the NGO Civic Consortium that funds local news in New Jersey gave us, our first major grant. And so next year we want to, we spent this year building the platform. Next year we want to do a community journalism class and sort of, have our journalists show up and be respected. So I see Helen's here. Sorry, I'm wrapping it up. Sorry. But local news matters. At the end of the day, local news matters. Black media matters. Black press matters. And if we want to claim a space for our voice that is not curated by white power, curated by white corporate power. If we want a space where we can speak freely, and you can also go to the website and read my opinion pieces. If you want a space where people can speak about race and about justice, and address capitalism, the impact of capitalism and climate, the impact of a narrowing judicial system, on why a young man was kept imprisoned for a year without a trial, without an indictment. If you want to see what an attorney does to wrestle to get justice for a young man and his brothers, Public Square is a space that wants to do that and wants to do lots of it and more of it. And we want to have journalists. We have somebody who sits on the advisory committee with Linda and Andy. She's a journalist in Cape Town. There's another advisory committee member who's a journalist in the Caribbean. So we want to eventually be able to tell those stories and have pages where people can tell their international stories, because we are the global majority. We are an international people, and not because of the European slave trade. We are an international people because we have been traveling across the world, and we all come out of the Great Savannah. So. Any questions?
Josie, before we take questions, I want Josie to talk about having Caucasian people on staff, because you did a really good job the other night. And I think, usually people have them on for different motivations, like they bring money, whatever. And I think it's important that you explain to people that if you see people, they have an obligation to change their perspective. So if you could speak to that before people ask questions, that would be helpful.
Sure. So, I say to folks, I'm not by myself, but in a collaborative space, and that's with Andy and with Linda and with others. And I say that I'm building a space with a value proposition that places race, justice, and community at the center to amplify our voices. I'm not serving communities of color. I'm serving every single community that will read me, and I'm doing that deliberately because our voice matters in those spaces. I want us to tell our stories of what we see and experience, that and everyone should read. And so, I often show up in new spaces and I say to them, I am not doing Black news. I'm doing news through a Black anti-oppression lens. I'm doing news by the mere fact that I'm in this space is to address oppression and to address the marginalization and to address the fetishization of Black people in news. And so I'm in those spaces to not be objectified or commodified or fetishized. I'm there to bring other folks of color into the space. So we have white people who write for us, but they write through that Black anti-oppression lens. So that means that they have to, the stories are framed with our value proposition. So we give every story a framing with our value proposition. We have a white woman who's our managing editor. She recognizes, that as a Black woman who's founder and publisher, that my objective is to write the best possible stories, which is why she's there. My objective is for us to write the best possible stories with a Black anti-oppression lens. Does that
And I'm
help?
just, yeah, I think that'll be very helpful. So if any questions,
Yeah,
please-
we have Jocelyn on.
And Andy, where's Andy? Before I go into Richards, have you anything? Richards is one of our actually trained, professional, certified, and meritorized folks on the Shino Manager and Editor, who are the actual journalists. So Richards, if you want to show up and show your gorgeous face. She's from California, lives out in New Jersey now. Okay, she's ducking me. Okay, fine. So go ahead.
I got a
Question.
note saying, put your video on.
That's from me.
Oh my goodness. No, I don't really have anything to add to that, Josie. You know how I am. I'll interject.
Yeah, she'll
if I
yeah.
feel like I have something to say. Yeah.
Right.
So we do
So
have a
any
question though
questions?
from Jocelyn. Jocelyn, what's your?
I don't have a question, just a comment. I want to say good evening first, and thank you so much, Josie, because this is something that is needed desperately. One of my colleagues and I, we talk all the time about what happened to the investigative journalists. Where did they all disappear? So it makes me feel, I don't know if I want to say revitalized, but I'm really encouraged by the fact that you took on this mission. So I want to thank you so much. And hopefully it will spread beyond Newark, maybe to Trenton, that's where I'm located, or maybe Camden, where Helen is located. But hopefully you'll start covering other parts of New Jersey also. But I know there's so much to do in Newark, but our whole state needs coverage. So
Okay, now I'm going to interject.
Yes, thank you. Yes, okay.
Investigative journalism is like the creme de la creme of the journalism world. That's like the highest height you can get to, where you're investigating Harvey Weinstein and it's everywhere, and you're writing book upon book and winning awards. But that costs so much money to support someone to do that kind of work. So that is something that we aspire to. Certainly, we've talked about things we'd like to investigate within government in Newark, but that Josie's doing really well with fundraising. But that's where the money comes in to be able to support an investigative, and it's usually a team. It's never just a lone reporter. So that's money.
And
but we're
would
here,
add,
and we're ready to do the work.
We're ready.
Just need to be
Andy's
funded.
ready to do the work.
and I would add that, Jocelyn, one of the things, especially when you talk about policing, a lot of reporters, to get information from police, you're a lazy reporter because they give you the information. So we see a lot in the news about police issues because that's lazy journalism. The police hand you stuff, and so they get the brunt of the news. There's other news out there, but that's the easiest news to get. And so our papers are full with stories about people getting hurt, all the negative stuff. But she's absolutely, Miss Richards is absolutely right. It's very expensive. And in light of what has happened with journalism and the press, there used to be families, and the families were willing to invest that kind of money to have people do it. But as now, I think we have 3 or 4 companies that pretty much control 90% of what you do. And they're not interested. They're in it for the profit. Initially, the profit margin with the families was 36 cents on the dollar, which was really high. But the companies weren't happy. The ones who bought them out, they weren't happy. 36 cents on the dollar was enough profit. They want more. And so, like she said, and Ms. Richards says, if you put that kind of money, they won't make their profit. And remember, most of these people are in business to make money. They're not really there to give you information. They are in the business of keeping the status quo, directly or indirectly. But, something to consider. But the other part is, we encourage people, and Josie's going to say this at the end again, not only encouraging young people, which is great, because when they come aboard, having that kind of training is really excellent. Even if they decide not to do that, they may decide to do something else where those skills are transferable. But it provides young people with an opportunity to be published. That makes them more competitive in the marketplace, right? But the other thing, in terms of the state, there's nothing keeping people from Trenton or Camden writing a story. It's just that there'll be volunteers, and I think Josie's going to jump in on that piece.
Yeah. So
let me jump in quickly. I think I want to emphasize what I think Jocelyn was getting to. Investigative journalism is one thing, but I think truthful journalism is where I think
That's the
she's,
second.
yeah, I think that's,
Yeah.
Jocelyn, I'm speaking, I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think, what's refreshing is that, our stories will be told from our perspectives with without unfiltered. And I don't know any other word to use other than that, the genuineness of Black folks come through, because all we see on the news is the negative side. We know when Johnny gets shot, Johnny and his whole family is up for, when there's some incident, Johnny and his entire family's history becomes news instead of what happened to Johnny. So I would look at this kind of publication as one that will talk about Johnny as a human. It's going to humanize what happened to Johnny and Johnny's, the experience of Johnny's family. So I think,
Thanks, Helen.
And
I wanted to just be clear,
one more
Jocelyn.
thing, just in defense of journalists, journalists, we had an American journalist who was assassinated this year, and you did not hear a peep from anyone about this. So journalists are constantly under attack. They're under attack from our so-called leaders. And, there are people, I want to do the work. I have to fight with my Black editor to center Black people in my reporting. I had to fight for a week to get a story done. That was breaking news, by the way. Every journalist dies to have a breaking news story. And I had to fight tooth and nail with this. By the time we did it, it was no longer breaking news. The only difference was my story had all the sources, and it had firsthand information from the person it was affecting. But these are the kind of things we're up against. And this is why public square is needed, and it's public square amplified. We need to amplify
Amplify the voices.
Yeah.
So, by the way, Andy, I want you to drop your website, your link to your columns in where you write. I want you to drop that link in so folks can check you out on enter.com. It's, I don't read it often because it's a firewall or a paywall. To get to, but please drop it in. I want to say to Jocelyn, we cover the entire state of New Jersey. We are headquartered in Newark, but we cover the entire state of New Jersey. So if you check out our articles, you'll see that they're from, and by the way, it's driven by the community reporter. So wherever the community reporter lives, if there's a story, we get pitches constantly, but we need someone in, if you're out in Plainfield, like Brian Branch Price is out in Plainfield. We've done stories in Bridgewater. We've done stories wherever the community reporter is. We're writing from that perspective. So I want to give some examples on costs, right? So we're a nonprofit news organization, and many corporate news organizations are now becoming nonprofits because they're now accessing charitable dollars. It's easier to access. In Philadelphia, for example, the Philadelphia Inquirer is actually funded by one foundation. The Philadelphia Inquirer is a nonprofit, and they pay their costs through one foundation. There's a local news organization called Resolve Philly. They've been funded for 5 years through one foundation. So it's, I was just on a panel with the Knight Foundation talking about the value of funding Black founded and led news organizations. As Helen said, my objective is that we own the apparatus of our storytelling, but we also own the way in which our stories are told. That is a challenge. When Amazon gives Van Jones, how much did they give him? Like $100 million or something. Everyone thinks that he's telling the particular story from an anti-oppression lens, but he's telling the kinds of stories and perpetuating the kinds of narratives that have been designed by corporate press. And so we see a lot of white neoliberalism showing up with Black journalists, with Black press. We see it. We have to, at the community level, we have to fight to use journalism as a tool of civic engagement. Our stories are designed to educate the community. Our stories are designed so that the community will see themselves in the press. Our young reporters will see their stories in the press. As Helen said, they're building a portfolio. Nowhere else will they get a chance. Nowhere else will they get a chance for a news organization to say, we're going to spend 3 months teaching you about writing and editing. And, you know, you're going to get Andy Richards, one of the top journalists in New Jersey. You're going to get Robin Fisher, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. And then other editors, right? Nowhere else you're going to get it. And we're helping you to build a portfolio, to walk into the door and say, listen, this is what I've been doing with my time, whether or not you want to be a journalist. You may want to do fundraising. You may want to be director of communications and write speeches. You may want to go into operations. We have folks. I just interviewed someone to be our director of operations, to learn nonprofit management. There are a variety of spaces for folks to learn skills or to bring their skills to build the organization. Oh, great, thanks, Andy Richards. So yeah, I mean, local news matters, and the fact that we have Black women driving this is critical for us to recognize and to celebrate and to uphold. I sat on a panel recently where the white institution that represents us as a fiscal sponsor presented statistic that said, 52% of local news organizations are now serving communities of color. So I said to them, can you tell me how many of those institutions are Black founded, are Black led, and majority Black writers? I said, and then tell me how many of those have lasted 1 year, 3 years, or beyond 5 years? Because that's what we don't look at, the sustainability of these institutions that we see as vital, right? So how are we making sure that they're sustainable? Other questions?
I just want to jump. You talked about the money. And I think it's so important you talk about Van Jones, right? And then Linda mentioned MSNBC. And I think what we have to recognize is that I guess the challenge for Black people in those spaces is, how do you tell the story? Like, they were getting paid. I look at Al Sharpton. As far as I'm concerned, once Al Sharpton became a member of MSNBC, there were certain things that Al Sharpton was just not going to report on with the vigor that we had known him to talk about these things in the past. Why? Because I'm not going to talk to you about a lawsuit or discrimination happening at Macy's, and I don't know if Macy's has discrimination, but if in fact that's one of MSNBC's sponsors, he's not going to say anything bad about Macy's. So what we need to learn how to do, and we all do it, the NAACP, you go to their convention, you got Walmart stuff all over the walls. Who's the biggest discriminator? Well, not the biggest, but they're a known, company that discriminates, but we take their money. So what I think we need to learn how to do as Black organizations is say, yeah, we take your money, and we're accepting your money in the spirit that you respect our mission. That's why you're giving it to us. Not that you're going to dictate our mission. And everybody else knows how to do that. And Black people have got to learn how to say, if in fact you want to give us money, you do not get to dictate our agenda. You do not get to sit at the heads of our tables. And we lose ourselves. We're so inclusive until we look up and we've effectively excluded ourselves from our own tables, from our own organizations, from our own conversations. And that's why what you're doing is important. And the challenge for you is going to, and I have complete confidence that you're not going to change your mission. And when people give you money and donations, and that's important. And and if it means that you're a smaller organization than you would be, then you don't sell your soul. We have got to learn not to sell our soul. Stand up for what we believe in. So that's my soapbox.
I think Helen knows me well. And my sisters in the struggle, Linda and Andy, know me well. And, Andy may work for the largest news organization in New Jersey, but Andy and I are, just like Linda and I, we're aligned philosophically and ideologically. So
I was trying to say, and going back to Helen's point and going back to Ms. Richards' point, the issue becomes, and there's two people who want to speak, Diane and Lenny. Have their hands raised, but if you could just speak to what can, and I thought about this, what can when Black women chat or individuals do? I thought about your situation that you just talked about to get this article out. I mean, it would be helpful to send a note and tell people to make phone calls to her and say, let that article run. So if you, I'm not saying do everything to Helen, but Josie can put it on the website, the link, and just ask people, you say what kind of story you want to run and what kind of hell you're getting, and then have people just get 50 phone calls.
Yeah,
right?
that's
Or 50
listen,
emails.
you
That's
guys,
organizing.
yeah, start following Andy Richards on social media, start reading her columns and sending, high fives, and do the same for Public Square Amplified. Start following us, share our news, share our stories. That's why we're here in this collaborative, right? We're on, Public Square amplifies Andy's stories. She amplifies our stories on social media. I mean, she's showing up as a guest editor on our page. So that's the collaboration we need if we're going to build institutions, right? So,
Okay, we have a couple people who want to speak.
And let me just say before we close out, so you can start giving it some thought. I'm going to call you Judy because Judy's hand is up. Josie,
Yeah, and Lenny.
If you can give it some thought so that when we close out, what are the kinds of things that women on this call can do for you? You talked about grant writing. Everybody there's you know who's on our calls, and there's people from all walks. So I want you to be able, in conclusion, to tell us what kinds of things can we do to help support you. Lenny, we're gonna thank you.
Yeah,
Lenny, go ahead. Lenny.
Okay. If not, let Judy go and come back to him. And Diane, too. Diane had her hand up.
Is your hand up, Diane? I don't see Diane's hand up. Okay, go ahead, Diane, because she was before Judy. Okay. Go ahead, Diane. Okay, nobody's talking.
I'm on mute now. I'm sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead
now?
Yes.
Okay. I was just going to say, Andrea and Helen, you didn't go far enough.
Black organization.
As long as you're taking somebody's money, you have to be beholden to them. It means
can I finish?
Wait a minute, Diane, we couldn't hear you. So go ahead and let Lenny finish. We did not hear whatever you were saying. So go ahead, Diane. Go ahead, Lenny.
Okay. As I was saying, you didn't go far enough. If you're getting paid by a company, you're going to be beholden to them. You're going to tailor your words and your input to things that will not offend them, because you don't want to get fired, you don't want to get demoted, you don't want to get de-emphasized, any of those things. I think of companies, shows like BET and so forth that are owned by white companies, they have some of the flavor of being Black, but they're not. If you really look into them, their stories are not so. I've seen stories here in the community in Newark where you had fantastic crowds, but because they went back to another controlling entity, there were a few people who were upset. I think about 10 or 20. When there were thousands of people out there, it always gets changed. And the sad part is that journalists that come up through those companies get tainted in a way. I did an experiment with my class a long time ago, and I said, here's the story. A man just robbed this store, and I went on, we did some other stuff in class. I said, oh, by the way, what was the race of the man who robbed the store? Students automatically said he was Black, because in the newspapers, they always mention the race of somebody if it was something bad. Otherwise, they said nothing. And so you get to a point you automatically assume, because the way they report the news, that certain things are true, which may not be true. It worked out all the time. But that's training, because they came up underneath a company that always wanted to say good things about people who are non-melanated and bad things about people who are melanated. So they always tag the bad things to emphasize that somebody that was melanated did it. And that's how they play the games. So in a sense, you have to own your own media when you are being a journalist. You have to own your own network.
Yeah.
And you see it now. There's stories that you want to come out, you want to investigate more, but you don't have the funds to pay the people to take the time to dig deep. So it comes down to, we have to support our news networks to get the truth out.
Okay, thank you, Lenny. Good points. Diane, your your comments, and Judy, you're next, and then we're gonna say goodnight. We're getting kind of late here. Go ahead, Diane.
Thank you. So I wanted to respond back to what you said earlier, Helen, and I want to say thank you to Josie for holding this conversation. Is that it sounds good to say if I tell someone I'll take your money, but understand that it's not going to change my platform. That's not, to me, it's not realistic, because most organizations that are taking money, especially Black organizations, need the money. So if you need the money, you're going to acquiesce to the donator. Otherwise, you won't get the money.
Let me ask you, do you think a Jewish newspaper who takes money from, let's say, Malcolm X, you think they're going to write what Malcolm X wants to say? They're going to write what they want to say? I mean, let's be clear.
So you comparing the Jewish organizations to a Black organization?
No, I'm just saying that we can't be driven. No, we cannot. Look, at some point, we can't keep blaming other people for stuff that we're doing.
No, you can't blame.
So the bottom line is that when you give me your money, we need to just be clear up front. Like, this comes with no strings. And you thank them, aggressively thank them for supporting your mission. That's why you're giving me the money. If you're giving me money,
I'm gonna say to you, that sounds good.
I'm saying to you that we have to do more than make it sound good, and you just got to do it. And that's what Josie's doing. I'm sorry, Josie,
right.
Go ahead.
Right.
Okay, so Diane, I want you to I want you to sort of take some time and sort of pay attention closely to your words, right?
Okay.
You know, in Buddhism, we say that thoughts become words and words become actions.
Okay.
And if we're invested in Black liberation, if we're really invested in Black liberation, then we think first of change,
okay,
and consequences after, right? And so I hear what you're saying, because often we operate in those spaces. But I say that when we, and it's hard, and I'm not suggesting it's hard, but
right.
if you build the mass, right? If you build a mass, it, I remember seeing one person in Montclair standing on a street corner saying, vote. If you build it, they will come. It only takes one person, right? So if we believe, and it's hard, and you have to have courage, and you have to be bold,
Sure.
that we're going to say no to complicity, that we're going to say no to acquiescence, that we're going to say no to these things. At the same time, we're scared. We're very scared on the inside. But if we say, I'm gonna breathe through that fear, and I'm gonna show up. If we do one thing and one thing only, which is to stand firm just stand firm and pay attention and say, today, I'm going to try not to be complicit. That's all you can hope for, to try not to be complicit.
And there's an example. There's an example. Chalkbeat, their rights for the school in the area, they've expanded. But I asked him, how was he able? There were certain things they wrote, and I said, who's your funders? And he said he made it very clear. They made it very clear in the beginning that you're just funding because you want to fund. Right. But you don't get to tell us what we write. But that has to be clear in the beginning. You can't take money and then come back and say you do it. You have to let them know. I'm just letting you know, you're signing this piece of paper that says you, and I think they do have to sign something indicating
you do have to, yes, you do have to. Yeah, and remember, if somebody gives you money, they've already read your mission statement, they've read your grant application. Our grant application is very clear about who we are and what we intend to be. Our website shows, the stories we write and our mission and our vision. So we're pretty clear. And, I've been sort of like the person that people, especially in Newark, people know me as anti-racist and anti-capitalist and anti-oppression. So these are not sort of, you don't, it doesn't show up as radical in public square, but what we will not do is we will not hold true to our mission.
So Josie, let me be clear. I'm not questioning what you're saying or what you're doing. That's number one.
Oh, no, I know that.
Okay. But yeah, I totally get it. And it takes one. But in just so many cases, a lot of people aren't strong. And let me just say that a lot of people aren't strong enough to hold to their values when it comes to funding.
But we have to be. And, I always say, but for, our ancestors, they were strong. They took sacrifices, they took care, and we stuck together.
Absolutely.
And somehow that spirit in us has been broken. And nobody's going to give that back to us. We got to take it back. And
Right.
that's what I see. And that's what I see Josie doing. And we have to be unapologetic. And you can't be afraid. You're going to get fired. You're not going to get the funding, whatever. It is what it is.
I've been fired by white people for being Black, so I know that well.
Yeah, I quit because I said I'm Black. But the bottom line is that
On a daily basis.
at some point we have to be truthful to ourselves, and we cannot look for affirmation, approval, acceptance, or whatever from other people. If in fact I have a Black publication, if in fact I'm a Black organization, you give me money, I'm going to assume all that what Josie just said, that you know what I'm about, and you're giving me that money to support my agenda, and you don't get to co-opt it. And I have to give this example real quick. I don't know if you all remember a few years back, the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum in Alabama had invited Angela Davis to be their guest speaker. Well, they have a boardroom that are full of people that don't look like Angela Davis, and they were outraged because she supports Palestinians. And they had the audacity, a Black organization, to reverse themselves and uninvite a daughter of the city. And it didn't go over well for them. And why? Because the people who were sitting at that table didn't look like them. And they were not committed to the mission of the organization. As a result, she came, and a lot of people who were sitting around that table are no longer around that table, but we cannot invite people to come into our circles and then give them our voice. And that's what I think Josie is trying to do here. Judy, before we sign off, did you have a question, or are you okay?
Well, I had a question. I'll probably have to retool it based on the conversation you just had. Because
thank you, Diane.
Thank you.
Because I'm very happy that you guys are doing this, because I think it's really needed, because a lot of local news organizations, even if they're not attuned to the Black perspective, have actually gone under because of funding or lack of funding. And so I have no intention of impugning anybody's integrity or anything, because you sound like you have all this integrity. But like Lenny was also saying, what will you actually be doing different when you're on, for example, a cash crunch, and the only place you can get funding from is somebody who wants to tell you what to do? I mean, I know one of the things that can be done is to first seek funding from people who are like-minded. But if you're in this situation where the funder says, well, no, this is kind of what you got to do, how will you do that different? Or how does that, and I don't want to point it to you, how does one—
No, I understand, yeah.
How does one do that different?
Sure. I've been doing nonprofit management for 3 decades, and I've raised, I'd say, about $45 million over the course of my career. And that's always a question that comes up. But more often than not, the funders who fund news nonprofits recognize their mission. The mission's not hidden. And they may want you with those monies to do a particular program that doesn't fit with your mission. So they may have the ideas about what they'd like to do. And there are ways to negotiate with funders, right? So that is, it's, the Koch brothers isn't looking for public square. We're not particularly important to them. Amazon's not looking for Audible in the city of Newark, doesn't support organizations. So local news is, and by the way, small local news organizations rely a lot to build their sustainability on individual donors and foundations, right? Which is what we've started to do. We're going to be under, cash crunch. If you build your organization paying attention to the infrastructure that you're building, for example, we raised quite a bit of monies in our first year, and we took all of those monies and we paid for 2 years of operations. We didn't pay anyone. We took those monies and invested in the organization so that we would be sustainable if we couldn't pay. And because we're not, a turn it around fast news organization, we spend time on our stories. We could still continue to publish our one story a week until, we sort of build some sort of financial sustainability. So there are ways to sort of, I'm invested in building an institution and sustainability. So I pay close attention to ways in which we spend money and how we structure our budgets. So I hope to come back in a year and talk to you more, but and I could talk to you more about nonprofit management and funding and donors and donor intent and mission and all of those things. But we're paying close attention to that. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. This is Don Vapors. I got to call you out. What do you want to tell us today, my friend? Do you know each other? If you don't, you absolutely should.
I know Dawn. Yeah.
I want to commend you again, Helen, for this forum. This is a very important forum because communication, information, knowledge is a really instigator of change. And this forum is introducing a medium that I believe, as you said, will bring about a dramatic change. It will, I know, undergo the necessary opposition, and that is good. When you know you're doing something good, expect opposition and be prepared for opposition. And I think that the board, with Linda on it and with Josie at the helm there and supporters like Andy, it sounds to me and looks to me like this is going to be formidable. This is going to be sustainable, and prayerfully this will be permanent and will bring about transformation that is necessary. I know it should go beyond New Jersey, and it will. Because when you add New Jersey and you add Pennsylvania and then you add Mississippi and you add Alabama, you add Canada, you add Mexico, you add Peru, you add Argentina, you add in Jamaica, you add in Grenada, you add in Amsterdam and our folks in Paris, this public square amplified will be amplified internationally and will begin to bring about the transformation in individuals, in societies, and in change. And I thoroughly support it and look forward to working with you to expand it accordingly.
Sure. And thanks,
Exactly
Dawn.
what Dawn just said. Exactly what Dawn just said.
Yeah, Dawn, you
But
got
Dawn, we're
listen.
already plotting our international
Andy and I
have to tell you, we were talking yesterday, so it's
yes,
like you
Andy and I
got
good
into our
schemers.
brains.
Yeah. Andy's going to be our international reporter. When Dawn knows me, he knows I'm from St. Vincent, and I think he knows that I do work with rural women in agriculture in St. Vincent. I wear a climate change hat, a resiliency hat, and so one of the dreams for this public square is that we would have a public square amplified Caribbean to allow rural agricultural women who exist outside of the mainstream political sphere to be engaged in conversations around price points on their products, climate and resiliency, and all of those things. And so to create that space. So, we would love, and so to create all of these pages from whatever city. Our board chair, I think, Dawn, you might know him, Wayne Winborn. He's the head of the Jazz Institute at Rutgers. He's obsessed with Josie. We're gonna, we can do a public square amplified in Mississippi. And really what that looks like in a very simple way is that there could be someone underground who wants to write about what's happening in Mississippi right now. And the attacks at the mayor right now, right? So there could be somebody there who wants to write a story within the value proposition of public square, placing race, community, and justice at the center of their story. and not just to report on the water crisis, but to place it within the context of the larger climate crisis, and that place it in the context of the attacks on Black elected officials, but also to talk about Black elected officials have absolutely no power. We think about them as having power, but they have no power. Somebody said yesterday at a forum, well, there's never been a Black governor. Does it matter that there's no Black governor? Does it matter that the mayor is Black? Because the revenue streams that come into municipalities to make decisions come only from property taxes, because tax abatements drain cities like Jackson, like Newark, of resources to support communities. So if you write a story within that context, that would be great. So thank you, Dawn. Yes, we shall need you.
I foresee a story in the future edition by Dawn. You are hereby commissioned, my friend.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you. It's time for Dawn to show up with his byline. Yes, thank you.
Yes. Okay, and on that note, Josie, we're going to close out with you. Please telling us how, as an organization, women, and not just women, there are other people here too, but how can we support you financially and otherwise, obviously? Right.
So let me say that thank you so much, Helen, for finally getting me to the table. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Linda and Andy, for just being not women, but people in my space, human beings in my space, and being very honest and open and just engage in not my success, but the success of this thing that brings us all to a space of Black liberation. So the first thing you can do is you can sign up for our newsletter. You can read our stories. You can share them with everyone you know. You can encourage others to read our stories. The second thing you can do is, if you have, if you know someone who is a writer, I don't care how old they are. We have a 16-year-old. I don't care how young they are. I don't care how old they are. If they're interested in writing from the community perspective and open to our value proposition to write stories about where they are, please have them check us out. As I said, we are going to hit 1 year that we were incorporated on November 11, 2022. We are also going to be in the middle of something called a news match campaign, which we entered into last year. That's how we started publishing. Our fiscal sponsor said, you should do this. We said, okay, fine. We got together in a room at Rutgers and we launched. News match campaign last year, for every dollar, we had a goal. And for every dollar we made, they tripled our contribution. And the Knight Foundation and Facebook and others selected us and gave us a really nice diversity, equity, and inclusion award for local news. And so that really helped us to sort of build out for 2 years. It will happen again. We were selected as the only local news organization in the network of the Institute of Nonprofit Press nationally and internationally. We were the only news organization selected to kick off their news match campaign this year. And we are doing it with the Knight Foundation, who happened, actually, the program officer happens to be a Black woman. And so we were selected. We were in conversation with her and members of the INN staff to talk about Newsmatch and the importance of unrestricted funding for local news organizations, particularly for organizations that are led, founded, and majority staff, Black people, people of color, immigrants. We show up as Black, we show up as amplifying local voices in global spaces. We are Black, we are immigrant. We are African, we are of the diaspora, we cover everyone. And remember, anyone can show up to write, but they must write through a Black anti-oppression lens. They must place justice and race at the center, community at the center. If you're white, you can show up and write, but know that you have to be transformed or you cannot write for us. You can, and by the way, Black people show up and they can't write for us because it's a headspace game, right? So we'd love for you to support us during Newsmatch. That's always the time that's best for anyone to support because, you know, as we say to funders, our subscribers don't have a lot of monies. The people who are writing for our site don't have monies.
When
so
is
if you
that, Josie? Josie,
tell me, it's going to kick off November 1st, and I'll share it with you, Helen and Linda, so you can send it out. So it kicks off on November 1st and runs for 2 months. from November 1st to December 31st. I'll share with you, we're going to hunker down and build a social media campaign. Andy, of course, is central to this. Andy's going to be the editor on all of the appeals and all the newsletters. She's going, again, I don't know how I got into this madness. Linda, let me just give a shout out to Linda. Last year, Linda was our highest individual donor last year. She made it really happen for us. She not only was our highest donor, but she also brought other people to the table. So I want to say a shout out to Linda for that.
Because Linda
not only was she the highest donor, she also has written 2 articles already. And of course, she brings me lots of ideas that I try not to listen to. Between her and Andy, my world is like ideas. I can't take it, the 2 of them.
Well,
so thank you so much. I want us to make as much as we did last year or more, because I want to make sure that we get the DEI award, but I also want to make sure that we begin to pay for the stories that are being written, because we've already covered the infrastructure for 2 years. Next year, the monies that we made, we have professional Zoom, our MailChimp, our email, all of those kinds. I bought press passes for all of the young journalists. So thank you so much. And please read the stories. Please share the stories. Thank you. And then, by the way, if you're a writer or an editor, or you are a retired nonprofit executive and you've got a financial background, I can teach you nonprofit budgeting. If you want to help me write grants, or you know of ideas about grants, or you are still in the workplace and you have an employee matching campaign this year, the monies that we raised last year, we were able to buy something that allows us to get employee matching donations. So thank you so much. Thank you.
I want to say just 2 things. One is that since I'm driving around a 21-year-old car trying to get 30 years, that's what afforded me the opportunity to do that. And I don't buy anything because I'm cheap. And
by the way, Melinda, wait. When I said the highest donor, remember, we just started out. So I like to say highest donor. You have no idea. You will not see her as a donor on our site because she doesn't hit the threshold. But every dollar counts.
Right. And I would just say that also 2 of the journalists are going to participate. There's a panel discussion on COINTELPRO on October 13th. And 2 of the journalists for Public Square, young people, will be there to ask questions about basically why is it that our young people don't know what COINTELPRO is, and it's so critical that they do. So I just wanted to do that little shout out. And also Public Square is co-sponsoring it.
Yes. So thank you for that shout out, Linda. Thank you.
You guys are great. This has been a good conversation. I think very informative. It will be recorded and placed onto the Miss Higgy YouTube channel. And of course, Josie, you're free to use it in any way that you need to.
Thank you. We would love to share it anytime. So just let's coordinate how we sort of share stuff. Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we'll see you too at the party. We'll see Josie and Helen at the party.
I remember touching. I don't know how far away I am, maybe 20 minutes, but I'll be over there.
Okay.
But anyway, on that note, I just want to stop the spotlight, bring everybody on screen. And if you all can unmute and together in unison, if we can just say, when Black women gather,
amazing things happen.
Amazing things happen.
Amazing things happen.
Hi, Jocelyn.
Hello.
I can't wait for us to do that in person. Honestly,
Yes.
I can't. It's going to be powerful. But on that note, I just want to say, let me wrap up this recording and then we can chat for a few more minutes. But I just wanted to wrap this up on a note that just says thank you so much, Josie, Andy. I love your name, Andy, and Linda, for sharing what you guys are doing. It's powerful work, and we look forward to supporting you however we can. And on that note, I'm going to stop the recording. If I can find it, I'll stop it. Here we go.